Hey, team players, is local football flavor bringing you fantasy knowledge here in June. And the reason we're starting now is because this is where you compare players and find out who's ahead of who. Because even though their overall average draft value may change, you still will have the comparisons of them against each other. Also, we're drafting players based upon winning championships and leagues. Bob and I are not just cheerleaders for the NFL. We're going to tell you who's actually worth having and worth not. And we include every episode with our ranking breakdowns of everyone. And Bob, as I start this, I need to do a full disclosure. I do not believe when push comes to shove that Cordarelle Patterson is going to be the third running back on the Arizona Falcons. I believe he's going to be
Falcons?
On the Atlanta Falcons. What did I say?
You said Arizona Falcons.
Arizona. Well, you know what? He'd be the number 2 receiver on them for sure. But I believe he's going to be the number 2 receiver when it's all said and done, because Patterson is a great talent. When you watch his film, he shows amazing. Obviously, he's not their running back now, but when we look at this, he's one of their best weapons. When you draw any layout, you want him on the field. And I believe he's going to be lining up as their number 2 receiver when all is said and done when we look at the Falcons. And because of that, I am very high on him. However, if it comes to pass that I am completely wrong and he is just buried in their running back depth chart, he is irrelevant. So I need to put that disclosure on Cordarelle Patterson up front. So as I look at the rest of this group, this is the 18th round out of a 20-round league. This is when it makes sense to start exploring with defenses and kickers. And I'm going to take a half a minute here to say why the Baltimore Ravens should be completely undraftable to you, despite the fact that they finished 7th last year. The Baltimore defense, while playing an incredibly soft schedule, does not have a legitimate pass rush. And in fantasy football, for it to work, you need to be able to produce sacks. Given that interceptions and fumble recoveries are an inconsistent stat and that they fluctuate around, the Baltimore Ravens defense spent the whole offseason trying to figure out how to cover people, and they did it through coverage, but they did not do it through pass rush. And since pass rush is the largest indicator of how well a fantasy defense will be, that in conjunction with schedule, they have half of the equation, but not the second half. And that's why I would way rather have a team like the Bengals, who has essentially just as easy as a schedule, but with 2 much better pass rushers than would be on Baltimore. In fact, actually, if you looked at the entire AFC North and ranked all of their pass rushers, you'd have to get to like 10th before you get to the first one from the Ravens. We're talking about like the 3rd string guy from the Browns is ahead of that. So that's why we're looking at the Ravens. I'm saying I don't want a part of it. They worked out last year. They had a lot of interceptions, and they got unpredictable things. But based upon projectables moving forward, I don't want to touch the Ravens. And then we get in looking at the rest of it. We talked before about the joy and probably the more intelligent route of taking other people's handcuffs at running back. And we also talked about how Eckler's situation last year was way overinflated. They don't run the ball well. I'm not sure Joshua Kelly's a guy for me in that conversation of taking the handcuff, because I'm not totally sure that the Chargers are ever going to learn how to run the ball. I guess it was a very long way of saying that.
Yeah. So here's the thing. As you look at what's happening in this grouping of players here, and now this is where ESPN's projected, this is that we believe that these are the 171 through 180 best players for fantasy football. Now, the fact that ESPN ranks all of these kickers is insane to me.
You need to draft one.
You do need to draft one, but the way that I'm going to get to that point later. Let's go to Joshua Kelly first. Okay. Joshua Kelly is actually a really decent option this late. If you're going to go the route that we stated about drafting other people's running backs instead of, an extra quarterback or instead of an extra defense or something like that, Joshua Kelly is a good option. I don't think you need to take him here, but some leagues running backs are valued higher, so you might see him fall a little bit higher than this ranking says. I think that he's a really good option for the sheer fact that Eckler's usage, he's used so much both in the pass game and in the run game. That last year they brought in other running backs, Sander Horvath, Joshua Kelly, Isaiah Spiller at certain points in the year. And those players were getting touches. Now, were they doing a lot with the touches? Not so much. But when you look at Josh Kelly's situation and you say, okay, Josh Kelly, what did you do last year? He didn't do that much either, but he had 2 games that he had above 10 points. And so that's in a let me look and see where we're getting at. That's in a PPR league. If you jump it down to standard, just so we can get a nice little comparison here. He's not ranked anywhere close to the top 30, so let's just be careful with that. You're not really even he's at the
I feel like if you draft Josh Kelly, he's a guy you're going to end up cutting for a streamer pick later on.
Well, yeah, there's a good chance. I mean, that is ideally the situation you want to be in. You want to be in the situation where you drafted a guy. Okay, he didn't turn out fine, but then you found another guy on the waiver wire that's going to produce as well.
Well, see, this is my argument for last episode why I wanted Williams.
But I get it. No, I'm not saying that. Going back to Williams, the reason I don't like him is because he hasn't proven anything on the field yet.
Neither is Josh Kelly.
His floor and his ceiling are unknown. Mm-hmm. In Joshua Kelly, I know that if Eckler goes down, there's a good chance I can get at least half of Austin Eckler's numbers out of him, either as a runner or as a passer, because he had 2 games above 10 points in a PPR league last year. You're not getting, I mean, I get your case for Jameson Williams, but at least Joshua Kelly is healthy, that if Austin Eckler goes down week 1, I now have a guy I can trade, or I can try to start him. And I'm more inclined to probably trade Joshua Kelly if it came down to it than to start him and get something else out of it. But that's the long and short to say that I think that Joshua Kelly is a valuable asset. I probably won't take him. I also like Cordarelle Patterson here because, yes, that running back room is crowded, and it was crowded last year for him, but he was still making the most of a crowded situation. And when even in a snap share where he's only getting 36% of the snaps or 27% of the snaps, as we said, that's not good for guys like, players that aren't explosive. They're not going to get that much out of their snaps like Kareem Hunt, who has been aging. You look at Cordarelle Patterson, and he still showed some juice last year. Mm-hmm. Prior to the injury, he was on fire. If you drafted him, you were really excited. Now there's 2 already what I feel are like stud-like running backs in that backfield. Mm-hmm. But Cordarelle Patterson, for your same case that he could become a wide receiver 2, he's perfectly capable of slotting into the wide receiver role. And for Desmond Ridder to use him and Kyle Pitts and London, and then they have Scotty Miller and they have a couple other guys on the team.
I think he's night and day above Scotty Miller. My question is, does the passing game of the Falcons support 3 guys?
I think the passing game of the Falcons at least supports Cordarelle Patterson in terms of PPR numbers, because you could see Cordarelle Patterson getting 5 touches and 20-some yards, or 5 touches and 40 yards. And so you're looking and you're saying, okay, yes, that's kind of a low ceiling, or kind of a low floor, but to the same degree, he does have a pretty high ceiling when he's explosive enough and gets into space. So I really like Cordarelle Patterson, and I'm more willing to take a chance on Cordarelle Patterson than I would on Jameson Williams, just because I know that he's healthy, and I know if something were to happen to the other 2 guys on the field, that they're going to slot Cordarelle Patterson right back into that position, and Cordarelle Patterson's going to be successful. Same thing to go here with Donovan Peoples-Jones. I really like Donovan Peoples-Jones. I know you're really low on him because you're a little bit higher on Elijah Moore. But the way that he was used last year with Brissett, there were games where he did disappear. Mm-hmm. But he did show us something last year. And I'm going to go into these snap numbers really quickly so that we can see how he was used in the red zone as well. Because, you look at it and you're like, well, Bob, he wasn't used in the red zone at all. Like, there's no chance that he was used in the red zone because when they got to the red zone, it was all Nick Chubb. It was all Cooper, or it was all, who was the tight end that I liked there? Njoku. So you look at it and you're saying, well, that's not really a good selection. But for the same reason you like those deep ball threats here, Donovan Peoples-Jones was on the field there was only one game where he was on the field, 2 games where he was on the field less than 80% of the snaps. So, I think that bringing in Elijah Moore, I don't think it's going to necessarily threaten that much, because he's proven himself on the field to be a valuable asset for that team. He got 162 fantasy points last year. And granted, that might not be the best total fantasy points that you could get, but 162 points right here in this part of the draft, it's
a decent stable spot.
That's a stable position to be in. And let me just get your.
Well, how did he do after Watson returned, Bob? So for the final 6 games, what did the Donovan's Peoples-Jones give for you?
All right, let's go. And we're going to have to go down here on this list. Here we go, Donovan Peoples-Jones. So, again, Donovan Peoples-Jones had 3 touchdowns in the red zone, which isn't tremendous. So let's look at what his weekly fantasy leaders were. Let's go.
Okay, what do you do with Watson? That's the whole question to me, because did Watson like him or not?
All right, so Donovan Peoples-Jones after the bye, right? So let's go up here. Week 13?
Week 13 was their bye, yeah. The final 6 games when Watson played.
All right. So we're going after the bye. He had 9.9, 12.1. Then he disappeared, 1.6, 10.4, 11.4, 9.1, 0.2, 7.3, 4.2. But that was basically, they were in give-up mode. That was in a standard league. That wasn't PPR numbers. So we jump now to the PPR numbers because I think it's important to give both of those sides of the coin there. And I'm looking at Peoples-Jones, and I'm seeing his numbers go like this after the bye week. 14.9, 17.1, 3.6, 13.4, 19.4, 13.1, 1.2, 8.3, 6.2.
Which means when he's on, Watson turns him on. The problem with Peoples-Jones, and this is just a bias of the way I play. I don't like having to think week to week. And Peoples-Jones is a complete and utter matchup dependency guy. This is the same reason I'm against players like Ayuk. Because when they're on, it's nice. And I think he's just a less talented version of Ayuk, quite frankly. But when he's not on, it's like, I might lose my week that week because he wasn't on.
In leagues that have 2 flexes, and you're going into the almost into the 200th player right now, most people aren't considering.
He's one taking a floater on. There's no doubt about that.
Most people aren't considering these kickers like this, and they're already. I mean, if you look at the players around him last year in terms of just fantasy numbers for a wide receiver, he was. Let me get back on here. Tyler Boyd was the 34th wide receiver last year, and he's on this list. But that was because they had a lot of injuries in Cincinnati, and he stepped up to the plate. And I don't think that that's going to happen this year. Donovan Peoples-Jones ranked in this range of Boyd, Lazard, Gabe Davis, Josh Palmer, Deebo Samuel. Pickens was below him, Christian Watson, Keenan Allen, Cortland Sutton, Marquise Brown. Granted, Marquise Brown got hurt. KJ Osborne, Mac Hollins. And so you say to yourself, out of all of those situations, Mac Hollins is the number 2, technically the number 2 in Atlanta. So do you like Atlanta? Cortland Sutton is the number 2 in Denver. Do you like Russell Wilson? Keenan Allen is the number 1, 2 in
Arizona, but
Chargers. We don't like Christian Watson this year. George Pickens is the number 1-ish, 2-ish in the Steelers. And you're saying to yourself, okay, well, who's going to provide me the biggest chance of an explosion here out of that group of players? Well, it's Gabe Davis and Donovan Peoples-Jones potentially. But
it's a good outside pick.
I'm drafting Keenan Allen higher. I'm drafting George Pickens higher, but I can get that same kind of explosive potential because, like I said, Elijah Moore is an enigma as a wide receiver for me because there were games in a couple years ago where he was fine, and then he just completely gave up and disappeared in the Jets system. And so if I'm Deshaun Watson and I'm looking to make connections, I'm going to be like, yo, Amari, yo, Donovan Peoples-Jones. Like, this is
the one thing that Cleveland did well, all three of those receivers are different styles. So depending upon the flavor that they want for their matchup, they can really hit the button on. It's not like Cincinnati where they have two guys who can play any kind of style and dominate in Higgins and Chase. Cleveland basically said, I need a good guy for over the top, I need a good guy for route running, and I need a good guy for underneath. And that's what Cleveland did. And you can make an argument that that might be even a better way to build it. I'd rather have two Jack Small trays that are amazing. But if you're playing against a slower team or a team that doesn't have as good of a pass rush, Donovan Peoples-Jones will rip you apart.
And it's the Gabe Davis philosophy, but that most people are drafting Gabe Davis 7 rounds earlier than Donovan Peoples-Jones.
So of this group, I don't mind Peoples-Jones. He's certainly in my top 3 of this group.
But I will tell you,
and this is something you can look at.
I will tell you this grouping is very interesting when it comes to the tight ends because, I feel like ESPN is ranking a lot of tight ends almost unnecessarily because I feel like ESPN should rank more wide receivers and more running backs within their top 200 just because there are less tight ends drafted there are less tight ends available, but there's also less tight ends drafted than there are wide receivers and running backs. Rarely do I see my league mates take 2 or 3 tight ends. And we're getting down now past the 20th best tight end theoretically.
Yeah, it's a little crazy.
And
Logan Thomas is undraftable.
And Logan Thomas from an injury perspective is undraftable. He's unreliable, undraftable. Hunter Henry.
I'm not sure he's their opening day starter.
Hunter Henry has Mike Gesicki coming in to possibly usurp some of his role, and I don't think that offense is going to be scoring.
In the first place.
I'm not sure that offense is going to be scoring a lot anyway. And then Dalton Kincaid, he has the best situation out here. If you'd like to take a floater on a tight end, I think that.
Here's the thing with rookie tight ends. Rookie receivers don't do good in fantasy. Rookie tight ends don't exist. In the NFL, it takes 4 to 5 years to become a quality tight end.
Yeah, I think if you're going to take a floater on any rookie tight end, it would be one that has one of the best quarterbacks in the league.
Oh, that's fair. Sure.
And it's one that could get a lot of red zone opportunities depending upon how his development goes. So
but when push comes to shove and you need to win a game, are you throwing to Kincaid, the rookie, or are you throwing it to Diggs?
Oh, when push comes to shove, I'm not drafting any of those 3 tight ends. But
that's what I'm saying. It's why you shouldn't. He's a good name. He's a good story. If you're in a keeper league, yeah, absolutely. But if you're in just a let's see what happens this year, we redraft next year. No, you're exactly right, Bob. None of those 3 tight ends are worthy to be on the radar. Because here's the other thing: if he gets hot in week 8, you'll be able to stream him.
It's exactly the case, and the same thing goes here. I think Tyler Boyd is going to be drafted in your league. I think he's going to be drafted based off the name. I think he's going to be drafted based off the situation. His situation isn't bad. He's the 3rd wide receiver on that team. However, when both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins play, he's almost an afterthought. And so you have to rely on one of those players to get injured. And I think that's fine to a degree for his production to be at the 20-point level that you've seen him be at.
There is a caveat in Cincinnati with why Boyd might be a little bit bigger. They got rid of Hurst, and they don't really have a tight end. So he went from the 3A, 3B option per play to now he's the solid 3, kind of without a doubt, which will help him in the red zone. But again, it doesn't make Higgins or Chase any less attractive.
Yeah, I see that. And it's one of those things where when those guys, like there were games last year where Boyd put up 29 and 20. And I believe
Boyd's the handcuff version of receivers.
Yeah.
He's exactly what he is.
So last year his target share was 13%.
Yeah.
So I feel like Donovan Peoples-Jones has a better chance.
Donovan Peoples-Jones is a vastly better athlete. No
Right.
doubt.
But I'm saying based on name recognition, people are going to see Tyler Boyd, I think, more, and they're going to take him more. So I would caution you there. And then Young Hoku, I think out of these two kickers, I would rather have Young Hoku. The dome is a really good factor for me. I think that they're going to move the ball with their run game. The Dolphins, we're not sure what their run game is actually going to look like. So I actually think the Young Hoku could end up being the number one kicker this year. I think it's a little bit early to say, but I think with the way that we feel their offense has been put together, with the way the defense has been put together, I think that it's going to provide a lot of opportunities. And the only thing that's going to get in Ku's way is his missed chances, because he does miss field goals, and he has to get that together if he's going to be the number one kicker in fantasy football. So.
We had the same conversation 2 years ago. He was the most accurate kicker of the start of his career. So it's certainly in him to get that back. So, Bob, why don't we conclude this episode with your rankings?
So Donovan Peoples-Jones is my number one. Cordarelle Patterson is the number two. After Cordarelle Patterson, you have Joshua Kelly. After Kelly, you have Ku. After Ku, you have Boyd. And then after Boyd, you would have the Ravens, and then Jason Sanders, and then the three tight ends that I think are undraftable, just because you don't want Thomas. Henry's situation sucks, and Kincaid is an unknown. So I would say Kincaid, Henry, and then Thomas to round it out.
So I'm going to start with Cordarelle Patterson again if he plays wide receiver this year, and then for me after that would come the Peoples-Jones, Boyd, Kelly, Ho, Sanders, Kincaid, Titans, or correction, Henry, Thomas, and then the Ravens last.
Fair enough.